Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving into the Warhost Detachment and talking about why it is one of the best detachments in the game, and certainly the best detachment in the Eldari Codex. So I personally believe this is the best detachment. I have a couple of reasons for it, and I don't think they go into really, the most competitive builds or anything like that. I just think it is the best detachment overall. That's just my opinion of it. I think because you can take so many different units and they all have a benefit in this detachment, that just makes it really powerful. Also, it does play to the Eldar strengths the best. It enhances what the Eldar are good at already, and it makes it even better and more reliable. So I really do like this detachment. Personally, though, I have to say this right at the beginning of the video. I've played this several times now. To me, personally, it's not quite as fun as the Seer Council. And I do think the Seer Council is the second most powerful in the index. But, of course, truly, I think this is the most powerful, regardless. Having said that, obviously, we don't know much about the Eldar meta and how it's going to evolve. I have an idea about it, and I'm going to tell you guys this. I am going to be covering the changes on the channel throughout the coming weeks. I have a video planned coming up that's going to, discuss what I think the Eldar meta is going to, kind of shape into over the next couple weeks and in the months that follow. Anyway, that's getting kind of off topic here. So let's go ahead and dive into the Warhost Detachment and talk about why it is not only the best, but how you can play it on the battlefield and how to be successful with it. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at the detachment ability, the enhancements and stratagems of Warhost, the best units in the detachment and why they are the best. We're going to be talking about general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of the detachment, a close to optimal example army list that I have built using my own games, and that, of course, I've been using, and a rundown of how to set up and use the army on Tabletop Simulator. All right, so what is the detachment ability? So it's pretty straightforward. At the start of the battle round, you get one additional battle focus token. Keep in mind that this is the start of the battle round, not your turn. So do keep that in mind. You also add one movement to the Swift as the Wind Agile Maneuver, which bumps it up to +3, which is pretty useful for a lot of different situations. And lastly, you get to add +1 to any Agile Maneuver that involves rolling a d6. So that is going to be, of course, the Opportunity Seized and the Fade Back Agile Maneuvers. As for the enhancements, you have the Phoenix Gem, which is just as it worked basically before in the index. First time you're destroyed, at the end of the phase, roll a d6 on a 2+, you get up with full wounds remaining. It is very expensive though at 35 points, and obviously there's not that many good candidates for it nowadays, but it is still a good, enhancement if you really need to keep something alive. I tend to like this on things like, the Farseer Skyrunner or, one of your Autarch models. But yeah, it's just not really as valuable as it was before. We do have Timeless Strategist, which is, can be, again, taken by any Ozerani model. At the start of the battle round, you receive one additional battle focus token. While the bearer is on the battlefield, you can be in a transport, but you can't be in reserve. So this one's good. However, I have personally found that in my games, and it is going to be very list dependent, guys. In the list that I'm using, I don't need Timeless Strategist, but in your list that you use, it might be really beneficial. I think Timeless Strategist really plays more into an MSU style list. If you're running more of an MSU style, kind of list with lots of jet bikes, small units of jet bikes, and, small squads of aspect warriors running around, I think Timeless Strategist is needed. I am also working on a foot-based, for the most part, foot-based list with this, kind of Timeless Strategist enhancement in Warhost. And so far, so good. I'm kind of just in the planning steps of it, but I don't think this lends itself to more of a, traditional Warhost list with a lot of, vehicles and mechanized elements, but we'll get into that a little later. We also have the Gift of Foresight, which gives you a essentially free command reroll on the unit for 0 CP, of course, and I think that's just okay. I think it's good on a Farseer and a Guardian squad, to put in a Guardian Defender squad in the back. I'm not quite positive you want a Guardian Defender squad in the back with a Farseer. I'm not certain that that's the best play for this detachment. But again, there's just so many different builds you can build out of Warhost that the army list I'm going to show you is just one of many different things that you can do. And then you have Psychic Destroyer. It gives the Psyker model 1 damage to the ranged psychic weapons. This is interesting, and I think it's interesting that this, I believe, can actually also be put on a Warlock. So, obviously, you'd want it on a Farseer, right? However, there is something to be said of something that just straight up auto hits. And if you're in a big squad with lots of, psychers nearby, being able to throw out D6 plus 2 auto hits at, strength 7 could be more than AP -1, but it's AP -1 base. And then, of course, damage 2 instead of damage 1 can be pretty decent. However, the problem with this enhancement is it's really expensive. I believe it's like 30 points. And that's just a little bit too expensive, even for, a Farseer Skyrunner or something like that. So it's probably not going to be in most people's lists unless they really just want their Psyker to be doing a ton of work. Okay, so as for the stratagems, this is really where the detachment shines, in addition to what it has for its detachment ability. So we have lightning fast reactions. That's really good. It's -1 to hit until the end of the phase, shooting or fight phase of your opponents. And this is one from the index. It's just really strong, guys. It's basically something that your opponent's going to have to, really just put more units into whatever target they're targeting to be able to actually kill something. I really love this on the Guardian Death Star that I've been talking about. Guardian Death Star, of course, with all the Warlocks and stuff, because they're giving the squad -1 to wound, and then you're getting -1 to hit from this thing. So, this could be really difficult for your opponent to overcome. We have Skyborn Sanctuary, which is at the end of the fight phase, you select 1 Ozerani infantry unit and 1 friendly transport it is able to embark within from your army. And if you're within 6 inches of that transport, you can embark within it. Really powerful stratagem, can basically, bring you from the open where you're vulnerable back into a transport where you're a little bit safer. This is one of those stratagems that's key to running the Warhost. You want at least 1 transport in your army to be able to do this turn after turn. And in a lot of cases, I think you're going to want at least 2, maybe even 3 transports in your army. This detachment does mechanized Eldar really well. A cool thing to note also is that it's the end of the fight phase, so that is also your opponent's fight phase. And to give you an example of maybe, because some of you guys might not see why that's important, right? You might think, oh, well, you're always going to use it in your own fight phase, surely. But if you're going against some factions, like a melee faction, who doesn't want to shoot at you because maybe they don't want to really, kind of proc your fade away or anything like that, and they just want to kind of leave you until the assault, being able to embark at the end of your opponent's fight phase is also pretty good, because it means they can basically pull you out of combat. So as of now, the Warhost Detachment doesn't have that little part that the FAQ stated for the aspect host that requires the unit to be unengaged. I don't know if they're going to change that or not, but it is something that as of now you can technically use. A lot of people might be like, oh, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound right. But, the FAQ is specifically for aspect host and not Warhost. So technically you can still do it. I don't know. That I probably wouldn't. But it is a little bit interesting. It allows you to basically use Overwatch with your army. So, instead of being in a transport where you can't Overwatch at the end of your turn, if you're out there in your opponent's movement phase, you can overwatch something, and then, at the end of the fight phase, you can come on back into the transport. So that is an interesting kind of difference. Feigned Retreat allows you to, fall back, shoot, and charge. Really good, really needed, especially for a mechanized list. It's going to be, possibly weak to people assaulting into you and charging you. That's very powerful. Blitzing Firepower. In your shooting phase, you can select one Aeldari unit from your army. That's any unit, by the way. It gains sustained hits 1, except Titanic, by the way. So you can't target your Wraith Knight with it, unfortunately, but it's any unit. They gain sustained hits 1 when targeting a unit within 12 inches, and if it already has sustained hits 1, then it scores critical hits on a 5+. So that's obviously pretty good, especially with things like Dire Avengers who are already going to get sustained hits, or, it's very good with a wide variety of units, which is cool. Fire and Fade is pretty, decent as well. You select one Aeldari infantry unit from your army that just shot. Of course, except Ozermon, Wraiths, and Aircraft. I don't know why they had the Aircraft thing in there, because they're not infantry, but, whatever, I guess. And that unit can make a normal move of up to d6+1. You're unable to declare a charge, but it is a normal move, so this does mean you can come back into a transport as well, which means the number of units that can potentially be disembarked from a transport and then in the shooting phase or end of the fight phase re-embark is 3. You have Skyborn Sanctuary for 1, you have a Zerman's ability for 1, and then you have Fire and Fade for another. So this makes it kind of seem like you'd probably want to have 2 or 3 transports in your list, just so you can constantly be cycling them out. That can get a little expensive CP-wise, but it is a very viable playstyle. And then lastly, you have Webway Tunnel. You select one Ozerani infantry unit wholly within 9 inches of one or more battlefield edges. And if it's not within engagement range, you can remove it from the battlefield and place it in Strat Reserve. And this means, of course, that units with Deep Strike can come in pretty much wherever they want the next turn. Webway Tunnel is the reason, and I keep saying this, I said this in my video with the, ranking the detachments. Webway Tunnel is the reason this got brought up to number 1 instead of, kind of more number 2. That was at least my reasoning with it. Webway Tunnel is almost like a poor man's, in certain ways, it's a poor man's Unshrouded Truth from Seer Council. It's a way for your units that are not mobile to be very mobile. So units like Wraiths, which are normally very slow without a transport, and typically you don't want to spend a lot of points on a transport with Wraiths because they're already durable. So it's like, you're not getting the double benefit from it, and they're already expensive as it is. This is a way for them to travel quickly and also be effective, and I really love these with D-Sites. So Wraithguard with D-Sites, with Webway Tunnel, they get a free, out of combat basically maneuver because they can fall back and shoot and stuff like that is really powerful. I do really love that combination. So the cool thing about these stratagems is that they're all useful. They're all good. There's not a single, lame duck amongst them. And I would even say that most of them, you're going to want to be fighting to use them every single turn. It's just going to be a matter of managing your CP correctly. Okay, so what are the best units in the detachment and why? So we're going to talk about what I think is going to be some of the staples. And then I'm going to talk about what you might actually also consider taking in your list. So Zerman with Dire Avengers is going to be an auto-include in every single detachment aside from Ynnari because you can't take them, right? And that's really good in this detachment because you can get sustained hits on 5s, which is absolutely insane with the Zerman on his mini feat turn out of a Falcon. And I do think you probably want to run a Zerman in a Falcon in this list just because, you're not getting the double benefit of something like lethal hits with the bigger unit. I think in Aspect Host, you probably want to run them with 10 Dire Avengers because you can double up on aspect tokens. You can give them sustained hits and lethal hits. And in this detachment, you're just getting sustained hits, so you might as well just, focus on his damage and not the unit's damage because they're only going to be really good against infantry, right? So Fire Dragons also love sustained hits, right? Of course they do. They can also get back into a transport afterward with Skyborn Sanctuary or Fire and Fade, so they can come out of a transport or come out of reserve, use their, blitzing firepower stratagem, use the aspect token for the Exarch or for Fuegan, whichever's, going to be in that unit. And then they can just kind of, dip back into transport. Or they can fire and fade, out of line of sight or something like that, out of reserve. And I say that because remember, you have the Webway Gate stratagem. So a unit of 5 Fire Dragons in reserve is not so out there, right? Because you can pull them out at any time, which is kind of cool. Dark Reapers also make excellent use of Fire and Fade, and Skyborn Sanctuary for long-range shooting. And of course, Strength 10, AP-2 ignores cover, damage 3 weapons are extremely powerful. And because of the aspect token thing, I even think you might want to run these guys in a unit of 10 with an Exarch that has a missile launcher, because you could just use these guys as essentially long-range anti-tank at that point. Being able to, potentially just auto-wound things and just be doing D6 damage for two turns straight is really good. Or you could just boost the damage of the missile launcher to a 6 and do auto 6 damage if they fail their armor save. Of course, this detachment also loves Wave Serpents and Falcons for the multiple ways of getting back into transports. You do want at least 2 of these in your list, either 2 Falcons, 2 Wave Serpents, some kind of combination of those I think is really good. Lycus is also good because she boosts units with critical effects via blitzing firepower or their base abilities. I think personally Lycus is gonna be better in Aspect Host, but I think she's still good in this. And I would even say that she's good in other detachments as well. I like her in Wind Rider Host. Whenever we get to Wind Rider Host, I'm going to talk about Lycus even more because I think she's even more of an integral part of that specific army. But she is good in Warhost as well for a number of reasons. Swooping Hawks with Baja love sustained hits and lethal hits. And specifically, Baja loves getting auto crits with his Cloud Strike ability. So when he comes down and gets sustained hits 1 from blitzing firepower, he actually just auto crits everything he hits. So he rolls his 4 attacks, and if he doesn't miss anything, which he shouldn't, by the way, because you're going to, even if he does miss, you can use an aspect token to make him hit. He's going to get 4 lethals, and he's going to get 4 sustained on his gun. So that's pretty good. Now, the thing I don't like about Baja and the Hawks is that they're all on 32 mil bases. So using a unit of 10 of them is a little bit, I've tried it, guys. And on regular GW Pari Nexus terrain, I was unable to really get a good, safe position on the battlefield for Baja and the 10 Hawks. I think he's one of those units where you kind of have to go just balls to the wall all in with him and kill whatever's in the vicinity that can, deal damage back, because if you don't, unfortunately, a low roll on Fire and Fade means you're not going to be able to get back behind that ruin wall. Right? Even with the, well, let me say this. First of all, you can't actually get the +1 detachment bonus on Fire and Fade. It's only on the agile maneuvers. So if you roll a 2 or a 1, you're only rolling 3 inches. You're not going to get back far enough into the ruin to actually get out of line of sight. And also, if you're trying to get into the ruin wall, because they have 32 mil bases, 10 Swooping Hawks with Baja actually sticks out a little bit, unfortunately. So it's not like a squad of Scorpions or a squad of Fire Dragons where you can kind of hide them in there, a squad of 5. A squad of 10 will not be able to be hidden just behind a wall. So you do have to, again, you have to be more careful with them. And I think realistically, the only way to do it is to kind of deep strike or cloud strike within the ruin footprint so you can see out of it, and then hope that your Fire and Fade gets them behind the footprint. I think that's really the only way to do it. But that does limit their line of sight and stuff like that. So that's what I personally found. However, Baja in this detachment is obviously really good because if you can auto crit with lethals and sustained hits on your Cloud Strike, that's really good. Also, in general, what else is good in the detachment? Well, basically everything, because nearly every unit in the index gets some benefit from the detachment. I think Wind Riders are good because they can get the sustained hits and they can double up. So Wind Riders with Lycus in this detachment can get lethal hits and sustained hits and be critting on 5+. So they're getting their lethals and sustain on 5s. That's really powerful. And, of course, being able to just, come out, do some really heavy damage to something, and then, kind of be semi protected at least from things like, small arms fire with lightning fast reactions, or, just in general, maybe you have like, well, the problem is you can't fire and fade, right? And I think that's the main thing, is that when you don't have fire and fade, it kind of sucks, but you can always fade back, right, with that squad. So I think, obviously jet bikes are good. I think things like rates are good, and we're going to talk about rates. I think rates with D sites are extremely effective in this type of list because they have a lot of mobility via the webway tunnel. You have interesting choices in, ranger units. So first of all, let me talk about rangers real quick. Rangers are actually good in this list too, because with the bonus speed that they can actually get quite up the board, and they can get into your opponent's deployment zone to score things like behind enemy lines, turn one, which is great. And because they're very expendable, they can easily just, score some points and then die, and then it's okay, right? So there's a lot of units that synergize with this list. Harlequins are not so much, they don't synergize so much, obviously, because, they're Harlequin units, not Azerani units. So a lot of the stratagems don't really target or affect them. So that kind of sucks. Having said that, though, they do get the benefit of the detachment bonus, which means all of their movement is at +1 with their Swift as the Wind. They get an extra battle focus token to use, so you can use extra battle focus tokens on Harlequin units. And of course, the fadeaway battle focus agile maneuver is good, and also the opportunity seized is really good because Harlequins, of course, love being able to consolidate longer distances. So yeah, basically, this detachment is the detachment of all comers, right? Every single unit is potentially good. It's just how you build the list that's going to determine how effective it is. All right, let's talk about the general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of the detachment. So, the general strategy that I have found, and again, I think this detachment is so diverse that somebody else out there building a totally different type of list can find a different strategy for that works for them. But I think in general, this detachment wants to use its superior speed to quickly stage before utilizing a combination of threat removal with its aspect warriors or bikes or whatever, and denial to prevent opponents from being able to effectively counter your hard hitting aspect warriors and wraith infantry. So, what I mean by denial is basically going back into the transports, right? Shooting, doing all your damage, then getting back into the transports, and then kind of just waiting out your opponent. Making your opponent trade down each and every time over the course of 2-3 turns. And then in the late game, using things like webway tunnel to position yourself to score secondary objectives and control the battlefield. And essentially also just deny your opponent stuff, right? Because you have units that can overwatch very effectively. Things like Storm Guardians with a bunch of Warlocks or Wraith Guard with D sites are both very good at this. So for their strengths, of course, I think the main strength is they enhance a wide array of units, which means list building is fairly straightforward and simple for the most part. You just have to worry about synergy and, kind of how the list works together. There's a lot of choices that you have to swap things out, to change things, to tweak things, and so forth. It is also very fast with improved movement abilities and repositioning, and it hits very hard at a close range. Or at long range, in the case of certain units like Dark Reapers. Its weaknesses, though, are that it has a lot of conditional strats. So the strats that are really good are conditional. Webway Tunnel is conditional. You have to be within 9 inches of a board edge. This is not hard to do, but it's not quite as easy to do as something like Unshrouded Truth, which I was talking about earlier. Just, if you're a psyker or you're within 9 inches of a psyker, you teleport on the battlefield, right? You don't have to go back and reserve and wait a turn. It's instant. So that is conditional. Also, of course, the conditional stratagem of, blitzing firepower. You have to be within 12 inches, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it can actually be a little bit of a big deal if you're coming out of reserve or if your opponent's trying to screen you. just stuff like that. So there are some conditional stratagems that with good play can be overcome, but can be a hassle in certain circumstances. Also, it suffers from a number of list building traps that players need to be aware of. So I think the biggest trap to Warhost is that, and this is something that I've heard other people say, and I've actually, when I first got a look at the codex, I was saying this myself. I said, I'm just going to take whatever I have painted and I'm going to put into Warhost and I'm going to have fun, right? And that's fine. I think this detachment can do very well with that. Just in your casual, local game store games. I think that's fine. And you're still going to get a lot of fun out of it and you're still going to, have some pretty close good games. And I think probably, depending on how good of an Eldar player you are, you might even just win a lot of your games taking whatever. However, I think at its core, you have to think of this in a more realistic sense of what the detachment's good at. This detachment to work really does need a certain combination of units to be effective. And I think it's mostly going to be transport based. I think you want at least 2 transports. This detachment wants a core of units that are going to be able to jump in and out of transports. I think that's the bottom line here. I think whatever you take around that to support that is fine, right? You can take a lot of different units to support that play style. But I think the main thing this list is going to be good at is getting in and out of transports. And I think that's really where it's at with this army. Until they change something, until GW says, oh, hey, you can't fire and fade into a transport anymore, or, oh, you can't, fade away into a transport. Until they say that, I think really this detachment does need, at least 2, maybe 3 transports to be effective. All right, so here's the list I took, and I'll kind of go over the weapons and stuff like that, but essentially, it's going to revolve around aspect warriors being in transports, like I said, with some supporting elements. So we have Ozerman, we have Eldrad Uthran, we have Fuegan, and Lycus. Those are the 4 characters we have in this list. We have 11 Storm Guardians, of course, with the platform and all the special weapons. So 2 fusion guns, 2 flamers, 2 power swords, and the Serpent Scale platform. We have 10 Dark Reapers. The Exarch does have a missile launcher. I know it doesn't say that here, but it was just because I wanted to save room on the slide. We have 5 Dire Avengers. Exarch has dual catapults. We have 5 Fire Dragons, 2 units of 5 Fire Dragons. The Exarch has the Dragon Fusion Gun. Didn't go with the Fire Pike because I wanted a little bit of extra damage on it. And actually, I think that's probably for the best in most situations, especially if you're with Fuegan. I think when you're, in a unit with Fuegan, the Dragon Fusion Gun maybe makes a little bit more sense. At least for me, I just wanted more damage, but you could go with the 2 Fire Pikes if you want to. It really is not that big of a difference. I have 5 Striking Scorpions in the list, just for some infiltration and scouting and stuff like that. We have the Warlock Conclave of 4, that goes to the Storm Guardians. We have a squad of 5 Wraithguard with D-Sides. Now, this is a key unit in the list. This brings some durability to the army, a unit that can, kind of fight over primary objectives, which is going to be an issue for this army overall, and a unit that can provide good overwatch and area denial. We have 3 Shroud Runners for remove cover and objective play and screening. We have a Falcon, which, of course, the Dire Avengers and Azerman will be in. We have a Viper for some objective play, and of course, just to kind of debuff some enemy units. I would most likely use this Viper in the early game to secure secondaries, and then in the later game, use it to target enemy units that want to shoot at the Wraithguard. So Wraithguard, by the way, guys, and this is a good synergy for you guys out there in any list that's wanting to utilize Wraithguard. Wraithguard, aside from the Spirit Conclave, really don't have a lot of defensive strats that they can be targeted with. So Vipers are essentially a pseudo buff because you can, kind of use them to shoot at an enemy unit that the Wraithguard will be targeted with, and then the Wraithguard will be at -1 to hit effectively, right? And then, if you are in Spirit Conclave, a Viper's still good because you can get -1 damage and -1 to hit. And it's a fairly cheap way to do that. We have a Warwalker in the list for some extra AP mitigation, right? To, kind of reduce enemies' AP. This is really good with things like Fire Dragon, so they essentially don't get a cover save. But it's also good with other units like Dark Reapers. I really love it with Dark Reapers. you hit something with the Bright Lances, and then you just clean it up with Dark Reapers because they're going to be at AP -3. So it's really insane. AP -3 ignores cover is good. We have a Wave Serpent, actually 2 Wave Serpents with Bright Lances and Shuriken Cannons, and these are going to be carrying 2 things. One Wave Serpent's going to be carrying the Dark Reapers, and one Wave Serpent's going to be carrying the 2 units of Fire Dragons and Fuegan. Lycus is by herself. Now, I do want to mention why. Lycus is by herself because I have found that over the course of several games, I've never really had to use the 24-inch movement thing. I used it in a couple games, and that was fine, but how I was let me put it this way. How I was using Lycus to the, best effect was just debuffing stuff, right? The Warp Spiders were a little weird in this list because I already had several units that were good at Overwatch, right? I had the Storm Guardians and the Wraith Guard in the list who were competing for Overwatch, so I really didn't need another Overwatch unit. So, Warp Spiders being an Overwatch unit is kind of wasted because they're the least effective Overwatch unit out of those other 2 choices, I should say. And I also found they're a little harder to hide. So, Lycus with the 5 Warp Spiders behind a wall is actually a little bit harder than it used to be. Warp Spiders are no longer on 25 millimeters, guys. They are now, I believe, on 28. And on top of that, Lycus is on a 40 mil. So, yeah, they're a little harder to hide. And I was finding that Lycus's unit was actually making her less durable. She was getting picked off. Opponents were picking her off at range, guys. And I was like, okay, maybe it's time to just run her by herself. And actually, it worked. She was very hard to target. Not a lot of things could get her. A lot of indirect fire just bounces off of her armor because she's a 2-up armor save. And, in this detachment as well, if somebody's trying to, get at her, she can always, lightning fast. So that's another thing, right? If people want to engage her in combat with something that's not going to just outright destroy her, that maybe is a little more dicey, you can always lightning fast and have her live. And then, you don't have to basically worry about falling back because she has fly, right? She has fly, and you have the feigned retreat stratagem. So there's a lot of things that Lycus does really well, and I think of those things that she does well, she doesn't need 5 Warp Spiders for it. Let's just put it that way. And that's why I have her by herself. But in other lists, like if I was going Aspect Host, I would definitely want her with the 5 Warp Spiders because I would be playing more aggressively with that style of list. This is a kind of list that's not as aggressive as it looks, right? It's very much a list that wants to establish, staging areas, and then it wants to kind of cycle in units over and over again. It doesn't want to just totally obliterate the opponent because you do want to use some of those control elements as well. Unlike Aspect Host, this army is not going to be all in on Aspect Warriors, right? So you do have to kind of worry about when and where your damage is going. Unlike Aspect Host, which honestly has the damage to probably just alpha strike people right off the bat. But, Aspect Host also doesn't have certain things that Warhost has. Anyway, all right. We're not talking about Aspect Host. We're talking about Warhost. So this is the list. I've played quite a few games with it now. I'd say, well, not quite a few, but I've played 3 at 2,000 points. And I think it's a fairly effective list. I think if I did make any changes, it would probably be to sub out one of the Fire Dragon units for a unit of Howling Banshees, just simply because having a fights first unit around is always useful, and I feel like that could be good. I don't have one in this list, so, basically having one would be fairly effective at preventing certain, assault armies from being able to, engage with me as well. But I think that's about it. I think mostly this list does very well. It has some good anti-tank. It has, all its damage bases covered, and it has a lot of mobility. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to set up the army on Tabletop Simulator. We're going to be doing a Dawn of War setup. Pretty common thing. I'm going to just show you kind of how to set up your force, what to put in reserve, kind of some of the things you should be thinking about in the first couple turns, and stuff like that. And then we will reconvene and come back to the video after. All right, guys, so this is the full Warhost list in its full glory. Now, I'm going to go over it quickly again just for you guys, but basically we have our 2 units of Fire Dragons over here, our unit of Dire Avengers, Scorpions, Shroud Runners, 2 Wave Serpents, Warlock Conclave in the back there with the Storm Guardians. We have our 3 Phoenix Lords of Zerman, Fuegan, and Lycus. We have the Eldrad, of course. We have a Viper. We have a Warwalker, we have 5 Wraithguard with D-Sights, and we have 10 Dark Reapers. Exarch has the missile launcher, and lastly, we have a Falcon. Now this list, just looking at it, it has a lot of tools, it has a lot of options, and I think that's the strength of Warhost, that it can bring in some additional units from other aspects of the Eldar army that can be very effective, right? So like when you're talking about list building, Aspect Host, you don't want Wraithguard in your list, right? You don't want, well, you might want Storm Guardians, but you definitely don't want to go all in on them like I have here. But because of the variance of stratagems that we have at our disposal, a unit of Storm Guardians is actually very good, or at least can be potentially very good and, you know, very game defining. And I'm going to kind of go into why I think that when I show you the setup and stuff like that. But essentially, this army is going to revolve around 3 things. It's going to revolve around our ability to use our transports to protect our damage dealing units, to give them more activations, which is essentially going to be the same in Aspect Host, except we're going to play into our other strengths as well. We're going to play into our ability to use the Webway Gate stratagem to teleport units like Wraithguard or Storm Guardians or, you know, Lycus, which also, you know, Lycus can also be teleported as well. Basically wherever we want, right? And Lycus has Deep Strike, so she can actually just kind of appear wherever to pass out her debuffs, which I think is a really good tech. And you'll notice there's no Warp Spiders with her, and I kind of talked about this earlier in the list building, but the reason for it is because Warp Spiders, a big unit, you know, 5 Warp Spiders and Lycus, a little bit too hard to hide with the rest of the stuff we have in the army. So this was a consideration I made really in the beginning. I ran her with 5 Warp Spiders early on, and I basically was always putting her in Deep Strike with the Warp Spiders, and I just thought, like, you know, I think it's going to be a little bit better, a little bit easier to actually just kind of go the opposite way with it. Take the Warp Spiders out, leave her on the battlefield, and maybe put her back in Deep Strike with Webway Tunnel. As you guys know, Webway Tunnel does put them back in Strat Reserve if they're within 9 inches of a board edge, but if you do have the Deep Strike ability, you can obviously use that when you come in. So this is the army. This is what it looks like. And, you know, as you can see, a lot of the elements are going to be similar to Aspect Host, but the way in which the army plays is going to be a little bit different. So looking at how we deployed here, this is, I think, I want to say deployment number 6, Dawn of War, Linchpin Mission, and we have banners, raised banners. So I think raised banners, obviously you're going to want a unit of like Storm Guardians or Guardian Defenders in most lists because of raised banners. Or, you know, if you have, well, let me put it this way. If you're not running something like Ghost of the Webway where your troops become battle line, or, you know, Wraith Host, Spirit Conclave, like unless you're running something where your, you know, main unit is becoming battle line, then you're going to want to run something like Storm Guardian. So in this particular setup, we basically have 2 Wave Serpents on the left side. One of them has Dark Reapers in it, full squad of 10, and that's simply because we want to be able to use those Dark Reapers as just some long-range support on the left side of the battlefield. They're going to be using the Wave Serpent to just hop in and out behind this wall. Now, you might be wondering, why is a Wave Serpent here if, you know, we can just, you know, hop them back behind anyway, right, with Fire and Fade? There is a specific reason for it. Dark Reapers are very fragile. They're very weak against indirect fire. And unlike the Seer Council, which has, you know, basically a no indirect fire stratagem, the 18-inch loan up, we don't have anything like that in this detachment. So oftentimes what will happen is Dark Reapers will just get singled out right away, or they'll just be bled out throughout the game and they won't be as effective. So we're going to have the Wave Serpent here. The Wave Serpent's also a good late game tool. right? It has the speed and the movement to get here onto this objective if we need to block out enemy units from trying to get on it. We can also, swoop over here if we need to, protect our home objective. A Wave Serpent is a good tool. We also have a Wave Serpent here with Fire Dragons in it, and basically the goal here with the Fire Dragons is just to come up this flank fast, right? We want to make sure that we can, kind of use star engines really quick, move up here, get into a good position to counterattack if our opponent's moving towards us here. We also have this area screened with Striking Scorpions. They're just going to just play very aggressively and scout up, probably behind these ruins here, just within 1 inch to force opponents to come get them. And again, this list is going to be about how you move your units and about how you are able to use and utilize your Fire Dragons and your Aspect Warriors. We have Wraithguard over here, and the Wraithguard are over here for a reason. Now, people are afraid of that Overwatch, so oftentimes during deployment, what I like to do, and what I've been doing with this list, is I've been putting the 5 Wraithguard on one flank, and I've been basically watching my opponents put everything that's vulnerable to Overwatch on the other side because they figure Wraithguard are slow. Well, in Warhost, Wraithguard can just be picked up. If you've noticed, I've deployed them 9 inches within 9 inches of board edge, right? Actually, yeah, fully within. And then, because you do have to be wholly within, we're going to go ahead and just teleport them into reserve, right? And we could just bring them on the board over here next turn where our opponent's not going to be able to react to them that well, right? Like if your opponent has a bunch of infantry units that are coming after these Striking Scorpions, we, can have some Wraithguard here for protection. We also have the Wraithguard in the list for a very specific reason with the D-Sites, and that is to protect our Wave Serpent with the Fire Dragons or our Falcon with Dire Vengeance and Zerman from close combat. Just simply because, yes, this list does have a way to, kind of fall back from combat, but we don't want to be in combat if we don't have to be, right? Like, if we put a Wave Serpent out here to kill something that our opponent has right here or on this objective, and we're vulnerable to getting, the Wave Serpent shot out from under us, Wave Serpents, even with the fade back ability, can still die. Wave Serpents are very large vehicles. Let me just give you an example real quick, actually, of kind of why sometimes this won't exactly work like people think, right? So let's say that we kill something, we come out, and our opponent has something right here, and we go ahead and we kill it. And our goal is we're going to kill it, and then we're going to move, as soon as this is shot at, we're going to move behind this ruin, right? And that's our goal. Well, what if you roll a 1 on fade back, right? Technically in Warhost, you're going to roll 3 inches with this thing. And does 3 inches get us out of trouble, right? 3 inches is like right here. No, it doesn't, right? We look at that. It does not get us out of trouble. Anything shooting from this over here is still going to draw line of sight. Anything that can, draw line of sight from over here is still going to be able to shoot it. So it can kind of get out of the way of stuff over here, but a good opponent will position models in such a way that if you kill something of theirs, they're going to be able to retaliate against you. And oftentimes, fade back just isn't going to be enough to fully get you behind this ruin, right? Sometimes it will, but not always. And that's what you have to kind of take into account. Now, let's just move this back here. Right. So there is a reason to have the Wraithguard in the list so that you can basically overwatch things that may be a threat, right? Especially combat units. Combat units in particular, I think, are something that Aspect Host and Warhost suffer against. Warhost a little bit less because you have the, fall back and shoot and charge, but there's still no real hard defensive ability against combat except for lightning fast reactions, right? And that doesn't always work. So, unit of Blood Angels charges into your Wave Serpent, consolidates into your Fire Dragons. You may have Fuegan in there, but a huge unit of Death Company or a huge unit of Assault Intercessors or whatever is still going to carve through a lot of your force before, you can do anything, essentially. So you do need to watch out for that. And I think Wraithguard are a perfect, unit to kind of protect you from that. Of course, I mentioned Lycus. We can also pull her back into reserve as well if we need to, or Lycus is just good on her own, right? She can move 14 inches with a battle focus token. She can move over here. She can move over here with an advance roll. She can move out into the open where she can, basically hit something and then you get criticals against it, which is good for Shroud Runners, but it's also great for a Zerman and the boys, right? So we're going to put these guys in rapid ingress. Now, on this specific map, honestly, the Falcon just doesn't fit. There's nowhere where we can put it that it's going to fit and be hidden totally. And if your opponent sees this, they will shoot it first turn. They will eliminate your biggest threat out of the game, right? So we're going to rapid ingress this. We're going to put it in reserve. And there's a couple things we can do with this. One, you will notice that the Dire Avenger ability is 9 inches, which means that unfortunately, even though a Zerman will get the ability from the stratagem, the blitzing firepower, the rest of the Dire Avengers won't. However, if we pair it with Lycus, we actually will still get the crits on 5s, right? So a Zerman will be, you know, basically will be critting on 5 still. The Dire Avengers won't be, but a Zerman I think still will, right? Even if he doesn't get the benefit, because his weapons have 24 inches. So that means actually we don't have to use the stratagem, right? We can save a command point there. So anyway, they're in rapid ingress, usually going to come in just somewhere on the board where we can then move, depending on where our opponent moves their own models, which is honestly what I think he should be doing in this list. And yeah, this list relies a lot on kind of making our opponent react to us, right? Big unit of Wraith Guard, your opponent has to respond to that, right? These Storm Guardians, your opponent has to respond. So another good thing about this list is the inclusion of Eldar and Storm Guardians. I really like this unit because, again, it's the same thing, right? Like, I know I have them set up over here, but we could easily push them back a little bit within 9, right? We can push them back over here, which is where they should be, actually. I don't know why I put them up there, but we can actually pull them back into reserve. Right now, they won't sticky the objective. We'll have to like put, you know, maybe a Viper on here or something like that to make sure we grab this objective. Or sometimes we just don't need to. It depends on the mission, right? If the mission doesn't have any specific bonus for, you know, controlling your home objective, then who cares about it, right? We don't need it. But in this case, yes, I think this mission that we rolled was linchpin, so we definitely want control over that. But we can just have one Storm Guardian here, and we can just kind of place them here. A lot of opponents don't go after units like this. We can make them -1 to hit, -1 to wound on turn 1. A lot of the long-range anti-tank stuff is just not going to do anything to this unit, and we can just pull them back in reserve once they sticky the objective, and we can bring them back on any board edge we want. I really like these guys on turn 3 because we can bring them back on our opponent's board edge, which is massive, right? This unit does a ton of damage. And, you know, basically, there's no stratagem support other than, you know, lightning fast that they can really truly benefit from. But Eldrad has Doom. He has Mind War, which is really good. You do get sustained hits, but we're not getting any aspect tokens or anything like that. So, you know, and we have a lot of flamers in the unit. So this, you know, the sustained hits, blitzing firepower strat doesn't really do a lot for them. But they just do a lot of damage on their own. And they're a sticky unit. They're really hard to deal with in the enemy's backfield, and they can very easily just kind of come back here, you know, walk, destroy something, and then walk on the objective after they shoot. They can use fire and fade, right? So a cool thing you can do is you do have to come outside of 9 inches, right? But you can definitely shoot something, kill it, and then move closer to your target, move closer to the objective. You won't probably be within range of the objective unless your opponent made a mistake, but it has happened, right? So, like, let me give you an example. If your opponent has a unit here on the objective, but they're hidden on this side, you can come in back here, you know, you'll have the 12 inches to shoot your opponent's unit, but you'll be closer to the objective, so maybe a d6+1 move is enough to get one single Storm Guardian on there, and then that's a threat your opponent has to deal with now, right? Eldrad's not bad in combat. He's not good, but he's not bad. And then the Warlocks are, it's the same thing. They're not terrible. They're better than your average Guardian in combat, but they're still not that great. I have them with Singing Spears. You could easily give them the Witchblades if you wanted a little bit better combat against infantry. We, of course, have the Shroud Runners and the Warwalker. These are support pieces. These are meant to just basically make hard targets disappear, right? So you got remove cover, we got -1 armor here to anything moving in the midboard. If your opponent has a big thing they just want to dump in the middle and, kind of just bully you with, we have an answer to it. We can just move these things out, tag it, and then, the fire dragons that are now kind of over here in this area can just kind of pop out, kill it. Easy, right? Now, I do want to explain why I went ahead and went with the 2 squads of fire dragons versus the 1 squad with Fuegan, and it's just simply due to the fact that I think Fuegan and fire dragons are enough to essentially defeat any target that they want to. If you're going against something that is harder than Fuegan and 5 fire dragons can realistically bring down, you have additional units that can help you, right? We have Dark Reapers that can fire 10 shots off. Our Reaper Exarch has a missile launcher that we can, flip a dice to a 6 on the missile launcher. By the way, the missile launcher, I think, is the main way to go with this now. I thought about the indirect fire. Truthfully, we have a better indirect fire weapon now via the Shadow Weaver. So if you want indirect fire, I think that's the better call. And I think the Reaper launcher is also not a good choice for the Dark Reaper Exarch. I think you really want to go with the missile launcher. So we have that, right? We have the 5 fire dragons in Fuegan. We have the Wave Serpent Bright Lance. We have, we have a ton of stuff. We have these 2 Bright Lances from the Warwalker. We have the Shroud Runners. We have a lot of firepower coming in. So any one target can just be easily destroyed. And then our second unit of fire dragons can do something in another turn. We don't need to use them right away, right? So even if our opponent does kind of kill 1 squad of fire dragons, we can have another unit of fire dragons going somewhere else, right? We don't have to commit everything to one fight, to one shooting phase. We can kind of spread the love a little bit. And I think that's why I like 2 squads more than just 1 big squad. I've never been a fan, by the way, guys, of 1 big squad of fire dragons. I just don't think they work. And I know that good players have played with it and made it work, but I don't think it's the right call. I don't think it trades up into a lot of things. And I think I would always rather have 2 units that can go after 2 separate targets in 2 different spots of the battlefield than 1 big unit that is going to just overkill something, right? So let me give you an example of one of the games, the first games I played with Aspect Host. I was going up against my buddy. He had, he was a Dark Angel buddy, by the way. He had a Land Raider Redeemer, moves to the center of the battlefield. And, I just told him basically that the fire dragons would kill it. And he, basically said, yeah, I know they'll probably kill it. But I mean, what else am I going to do with this thing? Right. So he did all of his defensive stratagems and I shot it and I ended up killing it 3 times with the squad of fire dragons. I super pumped with sustained hits, the aspect tokens on Fuegan and the Exarch. I just blasted that thing into oblivion. And then I realized that I could have done the same thing with 5 fire dragons, shroud runners, and a warwalker. And the extra squad of fire dragons could be doing something else. Could have gone after something else. And I put all my eggs into one basket. And essentially, yeah, the Wave Serpent just got charged the next turn. It got destroyed. And my fire dragons got locked into combat. Which it wasn't the worst thing because, Fuegan is pretty good in combat himself, but it did kind of get me thinking like, okay, this is a weakness of the list. And I told you guys also that I had a game where, I think it was a Zerman that got, tied up with a Brutalis Dreadnought in the same exact way. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you know what? I probably don't want to just have to keep spending command points on stuff like that, like the fall back, shoot, and charge, even in Warhost. When you have that option, Aspect Host, you don't. So I like the idea of 2 units of 5 better. That's just me, though. That's absolutely just me. And there's also more variety, right? Like I could deploy a squad of 5 outside if I thought that my opponent was going to leave something open in the backfield. Like if my opponent is Necrons, right? And my opponent has a lot of Doomsday Arcs. Well, in this case, what I can do, and let me show you some cool tricks that you can do. By the way, if you guys are like, man, I'm going against a gun line and I just have no idea what to do, to be able to get in their backfield to destroy their doomsdays and stuff. So all you have to do here, take your 5 fire dragons with Fuegan, right? Deploy them normally on the battlefield. Guys, he's not having a good day right there. Deploy them normally, and then go ahead and obviously hidden, not like this, right? Like right here or something. Put them back into reserve with Webway Gate, and then just wait on them, right? Wait until turns 3 when some of their opponent's units have moved to the midboard, and then just all of a sudden casually bring in Fuegan and 5 fire dragons, right? And be like, all right, Fuegan and 5 fire dragons firing at this Doomsday Arc, and maybe what you can do also is use sustained hits 1 on them and pump that. They're not going to be able to make that many invuls, guys. I know that technically they can make like 4 invuls or something like that, but usually what's going to happen is they're not going to make the invul saves. They're going to fail at least, 2 or 3 of them, and then you are going to kill it, right? Even with 3, like really the magic number here is 3, but if let's do some quick math on this, right? So Fuegan and 5 fire dragons. We have the 5 fire dragons. I like to give the Exarch the dragon fusion gun instead of the fire pike. That's just my personal thing. So we're going up against a Doomsday Arc. We need, I don't think they have stealth, so I think we're just going to need straight 3s here. Okay, great. We only miss 1. That's perfect. So we got those hits. We got a sustained hit as well. So we're going to go ahead and add 1 back in, which is, again, that's pretty average. And we're going to go ahead and roll again and see what happens here. Oh, and by the way, we're going to reroll all wounds too. We are going to wound on 5s though. So here we go. And we're going to reroll these because we need to reroll. Okay, so we got 2 there. Perfect. All right, so that's good enough. We got the Exarch with his, he's not going to get the Melta bonus probably, but we got 2 so far. And then Fuegan is going to have 2 dice himself. And if he rolls a 1, I'm just going to command reroll it. It's one of those kind of situations. So we just command reroll this. I always use... All right, you're probably not going to get that unlucky. Let's be real, okay? Let's reroll that. All right, so we get 2 hits there with Fuegan. And what we're going to do... Actually, we could have just used... We don't even need the command reroll, right? Because we have the aspect. We have the aspect token. So we're just going to flip this to an aspect token to a 6. We're going to... I don't know why I'm rolling 2 dice for Fuegan. Okay, we're going to roll 1... Sorry, guys. We're going to go back a little bit. We're going to roll 1 dice, and he's getting a sustained hit. That's what I thought. All right, so we're going to use the aspect token on him. We're going to roll the wound. He's going to wound on 3s. And remember, he's re-rolling all of those too. So he gets 2 more. So that's 4, right? Usually an opponent isn't going to make 4 of these. But of course, because it's me, it's going to happen, right? So here's the thing, though. If Fuegan gets 1 through, that's just a dead vehicle, essentially, right? He has Melta 6. But it should die. My point here is that on average rolls, those things should die very easily, especially with the grenade stratagem. If you can get close enough by moving the transport, you're not going to be able to do it from reserve, but it's possible if you can move it up. So that's what you do. You just come in behind them, roll your dice. On average dice, you will kill the vehicle, and essentially your opponent has to wipe that unit out, or it's just going to keep killing vehicles, right? Like, he has to turn around, and now the Doomsday Arcs, instead of shooting at your Wave Serpents and your Dire Avengers and your all your other stuff on the board, they need to kill those Fire Dragons. And they will, but they will not kill Fuegan. Fuegan will survive, and Fuegan will kill another one probably. So that's how that works, right? So if you're having trouble against backline vehicles that are just sitting in the back and shooting, and they can evade your Bright Lances, they're using their abilities to just reactive move like Necron Star Shatter, then just put these guys in reserve with your stratagem. Very easy, very simple tech. And that's basically it. So again, you could do the same thing with Storm Guardians, kind of, if your opponent has like infantry in the backfield that they're trying to, deal with. You could do the same thing with Wraith Guard. If your opponent leaves open, Like, for example, on turn 3, your opponent leaves, like, just 5 Space Marines on this objective. Your Wraith Guard can just come in and just blow them off the objective, right? Like, on average dice, I believe they kill a full squad of Space Marines. And you have your Warwalker and Shroud Runners, so they can just kind of come up, do some objectives, support your army. And that's it. You have your Viper, which is going to essentially do the same thing. It's just there for objectives mostly. And that's the list. That's kind of how you want to set it up in the early game. You kind of want to just play around with your opponent, see what your opponent has open in the backfield, maybe suck a unit back up into reserve from, your own board edge. And then your opponent is going to react to that by maybe doing a little bit of screening. But that's okay because, you could just kind of have them come back and just back and, come back and back and back and back if you want to, right? You can force your opponent to screen, which might actually leave them open to attack. So a couple times when I was playing this list, I would suck something back in reserve. My opponent would spread their models out a little bit and to prevent the, kind of reserve move. But then what that would actually do is it would leave them vulnerable on the flanks. So I could just bring some Shroud Runners over here, get some easy shots off, get some easy kills on, some scouts or something. And, you have your Dire Avengers also. So sometimes what's going to happen is your opponent's trying to screen with maybe like some Terminators or something in the midfield, and your Dire Avengers can just come out and kill them. Again, the game I played against my Dark Angels buddy, the Dire Avengers actually didn't do as good as you would think because of Watcher in the Dark, which gives them that 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds and dev wounds and stuff. So that was a little rough. But, I mean, in general, Zerman still did a great job even with that. He still killed like 3 of them, right? So he didn't kill like the whole squad, but he killed a significant amount of them. And yeah, in general, I do like this detachment. I think that it's very versatile in what you can bring to the table. I don't think it's as tricky as some of the other detachments. I think that the one trick it has is the webway gate, or the webway, portal stratagem that it can use, which is really good, but it's also one of those things where you do have to be within a board edge, and that is conditional. However, I will say this. I've played a number of games with this detachment now. I do think it's the strongest in terms of the way you can build it is just unlimited. There's a lot of things you can do with it. It has a ton of versatility. The units that it benefits are pretty much almost every unit in the index or codex, it benefits in some way, which is why I do think it is the strongest detachment. But I do see other detachments being super strong as well, right? Like Seer Council. I actually think Seer Council might even beat this out competitively with the right build. I just think that right now Warhost is going to be probably the detachment that's the most competitive, broadly speaking, against a number of, metas and stuff like that. But there might be some, metas in which Seer Council is going to be better. So that's the list. That's kind of how you should set up this army. Just kind of the one thing about this army that's a little bit tricky, I think, is the webway portal or webway gate stratagem. You do need to utilize that to, make the most out of this list. And I think basically the way to do it is have a unit of Wraith Guard in your army or Wraith Blades. I personally like Wraith Guard because of the Overwatch strat. You can kind of move them anywhere you want to. Storm Guardians because, again, it's really cool to just put Storm Guardians on something that they can sticky right away and also provide a good Overwatch threat, or just come into the enemy backfield and just shoot something up. Lycus is another good target because she can deep strike, so she can kind of go wherever she wants. And again, she can just move and charge things and just be a beast herself. She's a really good model solo as well as with 5 Warp Spiders. Viper for secondary objectives. You got your Shroud Runners and Warwalker for potential secondary objectives as well. You have your Striking Scorpions for that also. I think maybe the one weakness of this list, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it myself, is I think the one weakness of this list is just I don't have as many secondary units as I usually do because I chose to invest more in Aspect Warriors. I chose to invest in the unit of 10 Dark Reapers, which I think are really good, guys. I think the Dark Reapers are good. But the more I kind of look at the CP expenditure of this list, I think, maybe I don't need the Dark Reapers. Maybe I could replace that with like something else. Like maybe I can replace that with, I don't know, like swooping hawks or something like that. But that's just going to take some testing. I think Dark Reapers are just really good in this list because of Fire and Fade, especially back into a Wave Serpent. But time will tell how effective that will truly be in the long term. So let me know what you guys think about the army list, what you guys would do, how you guys would set it up. I personally think also jet bikes could be really good in this type of list, but you'd probably need to cut, something like if you wanted a squad of 6 bikes, you'd have to cut the Wraith Guard. And, the webway portal thing doesn't work on them. So they're going to have to just be a normal reserve, which gives your opponent a little bit of extra time to react movement and deployment wise against them. So I do think there's some things that, while they may sound good in on paper, I should say, in practice, they're probably not as good in this type of list. But yeah, anyway, let me know what you guys think, and we will be right back onto the video in just a second. Okay, in conclusion, Warhost is definitely the most versatile detachment in what units can potentially benefit from the detachment rules, enhancements, and stratagems, and that really kind of adds to the strength of this detachment even more, but it really synergizes most with mechanized elements and aspect warriors. So that's going to be at the core of your list, and then you're going to have other elements like wraiths or guardians or other stuff kind of supporting that playstyle. However, unlike the aspect host, which is kind of more of an all-in army, Warhost gives some power to other units in the index and allows for some interesting synergies with Wraithguard and jet bikes. So I didn't say jet bikes here, but it does also have some interesting synergies with jet bikes. Being able to give them sustained hits and then, possibly with Lycus, boosting that to crits on 5s on both lethal and sustained is pretty damn good. And I think that's worth talking about. I think that's awesome. The Wraithguard being able to come in, from reserve at any time in the game and then just overwatch something, shoot something, and then overwatch it is really powerful as well. And they're fairly cheap. I like Wraithguard with D-Sights because they don't necessarily need a Spirit Seer, right? They don't need a Spirit Seer or a Farseer or whatever nearby for them to be effective. They do lose some leadership and some weapon skill, but they're not going to be in combat usually anyway, and really their combat's not good regardless, and they auto-hit. So they didn't really worry about that. So yeah, I do love this detachment a lot. I do think it's the most powerful in the index for just the pure versatility of it. Now, again, I said in the beginning of the video, I don't know if it is the most competitive detachment. I think there's going to be a lot of people building a lot of different things. I think this is the best detachment because it is so versatile. It has everything you would want and need in an army, and it has so many different tools at its disposal. But again, I personally prefer Seer Council. That's just me. I think Seer Council is just, in my book, it just is more fun. And I think with enough practice, it probably has a higher skill ceiling as well. I think Yunari is very good again. And by the way, I am going to have a video on the Yunari. I have come to the realization that you can probably still have aspect warriors and stuff and transports in a Yunari army. I think they're just referring to Yunari units from the Yunari unit section, which refers to, the Dark Eldar type units that are not able to, kind of go into a Wave Serpent or Falcon. And I'll talk about that a little later. I think there's some confusion on that. A lot of people will argue the other way on that. But I think people are coming, in the Eldar community, people are coming to the consensus that, no, actually Yunari units does just mean Yunari Incubi, Yunari Witches, Yunari Kobollites, right? Those kind of things. And it doesn't actually refer to every single unit in the army. So, anyway, we'll talk about that in a later video. But yeah, this is what I have for Warhost. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about what you guys think is going to be the best detachment and why. I personally think it's Warhost, although I do think the more fun detachment, which is also very powerful, is Seer Council. And it's more my playstyle, so I'll probably be playing Seer Council a lot more. I will be trying out the other detachments very soon. Oh god, I have a lot of work ahead of me, guys. So we're going to be doing these detachment videos, for the next probably couple weeks while I, get the games in and get the experience in so I can share with you guys my experience. I also want to start a kind of a, like I said in the beginning of the video, a journal about the, kind of meta that's evolving within the Eldar community and the tournament community and stuff like that. So we will be going into that as well. I'm going to have probably a couple people on the channel within the next month or so, talking about their experiences with the army. We've had some players, kind of be already have some success in tournaments, which I definitely want to talk about, and I definitely want to, get together at some point with those players and talk about, what they found successful about the list and their list building ideas and strategies and stuff like that as well. So we got a lot of content coming, so stay tuned. And I want to also just thank all my patrons and supporters who have helped support the channel throughout these 2.5 years. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You guys have made the channel awesome. Truly. Without you guys, the channel would not be as good. That's just a fact. If you do want to become a patron, or you want to support the channel, I do have free trials on Patreon activated that will grant you permanent access to our Discord community. And of course, our Discord community is just made up of great Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategies and tactics and hobbying and all that kind of stuff. So definitely join in, right? I'll leave the link for that in the description. And also, I have a channel store page with a lot of Eldar inspired apparel, Eldar style runes and stuff like that on t-shirts and sweatshirts. Some of them are pretty unassuming as well. So, you don't have to be embarrassed in public to be wearing a, an Eldar rune or two, right? It's not something you can just wear in the local game shop. So, I have a couple of them myself that I sometimes wear around. So, and honestly, no one's noticed, or at least nobody's told me about it. So, they're pretty low key, and they're pretty decent quality, I would say as well. They're pretty good quality, at least the ones I have. So anyway, if you want to check that out, I'll leave the link in the description below. And lastly, if you guys want to check out the Amazon affiliate link in the description for some discounted Eldar minis, I will leave that link also. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody, and peace out.